the purpose of the meeting today was just to kind of chat back and forth with you about some things on the cybersecurity side of it. Obviously, we have the technology side of things wrapped up pretty good. And while we have an understanding of cybersecurity and pieces associated with that, it's always great to get someone like yourself to get really deeper when we're talking regulations or trends and things like that moving forward. So I'd like to just start off and just ask you, like, what's the latest? Like, what are you seeing in your threads from your clients and future clients?
Yeah, well, there's kind of maybe there's three things maybe that I'd say are kind of like key trends that we see, and one is, in a way, things are the same as they've always been. So you can kind of look at that and say, well, our businesses are, our clients are continuing to try and do their work, and that hasn't changed. And attackers are still attacking us the same way that they always have been. So in that way, things are pretty similar. Outside of cybersecurity, one of the things that we've seen from our clients is just over the last couple of weeks, the adaptation that they're making to new reality and working from home. And the vast majority of our clients have sent everybody home, or most people home, just kind of depending on where they are in terms of how, whether they're considered essential or not. So we see that. And then, I guess the third aspect of it is how things have changed. And we do see some differences in terms of the way that people are attacked. So, there is a little bit of, so there's some changes. There was a recent set of attacks that was kind of targeting home routers. And so that's kind of a new thing that organizations need to worry about that they didn't need to before. Then there's even in the news, there's some discussion about bad actors, the hackers saying that they're actually going to avoid some attacks. So there's some interesting things going on in terms of the way that threats are evolving now too.
Great. Yeah, I think what we saw was there was, once this whole thing kind of took shape in New York State, we saw a mad rush to get connectivity. And it was connectivity kind of at all costs, right? So hurry up, get people to work from home. How can we do this? Let's have a, let's get in a crisis mode here, get online. Now we see that companies are now evaluating their processes and everything they're doing to make sure, hey, we just put this in place. Are we secure here? Like, did we break any laws here? Like, are we out of compliance? So I understand that, there's a difficulty piece with balancing agility and security. But now, we're seeing the processes come under, more scrutiny now. Do we get people shred boxes at their homes? Do we, are people printing at their homes? The whole, have you seen a lot more conversations in, like, bring your own device policies and things like that come to the mix at all?
Yeah, so that's definitely been the case. And so when you think about how folks have to deal with sending people home, one of the things that you'll see there is just kind of this question of, does the organization mostly use laptops or not? And I'll admit that from my perspective, for years I've been suggesting to people when they're refreshing computers that they ought to just go ahead and replace their desktops with laptop computers. And to me, maybe it's just the way that I work, but what you do is you give your workers, even in an office environment, that ability to be flexible and move around the office, go into a conference room, still be able to collaborate. So there, I think, are a lot of good reasons for most organizations to just be using laptops instead of desktop computers. And if you had done that, and for the organizations that have, then it was actually a much easier transition. And I did talk to an organization, actually not one of our clients, but I had an opportunity to talk to a member of the security team that was struggling with how to take about 3,000 workers and move them home. And they really, most of these 3,000 workers just weren't geared up to work
Mhm.
mobily. They had desktop computers. So they had to sort out that aspect of it. So that's
Yeah.
that's tough. A lot of it is, so that point is, even before you think about BYOD, do you have mobile devices that you can use or not? And,
Mhm.
I'm sure your experience would be that mobile is easier to move off site, which doesn't mean you can't move desktops. We've seen some clients who are doing that too.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
And
but
the
then,
laptop piece, to your point, the laptop piece, um, that then shifts the security, because now, I feel that people see something inside their building, they feel like it's a little more secure, and as soon as they step out those four walls, um, all of a sudden it's like, well, what does that world look like? They're kind of, they need more help, and some organizations, they feel like, oh no, we have our stuff on it, we're good. Well, things are different when you have mobility.
yeah, it's a good point. And, so I might be veering a little bit off topic, but one of the things, like when you look at this, the way that people tend to think about security for desktop versus
Mm-hmm.
laptops, it has been easier for people to think, oh, I have a laptop, it could move, and so I
Mm-hmm.
should encrypt it. And the trap that you see sometimes is organizations will not encrypt their desktop computers because they think that they are static, that they'll just stay
Mm-hmm.
there. But
Yeah.
some of my best stories about stolen computers are, kind of these videos that you can see of bad guys coming into a facility, just walking through everybody, coming
Mm-hmm.
in and stealing an actual desktop computer and just walking out with it. And
Mm-hmm.
people tend to see somebody carrying a computer and think that that's supposed to be happening. So it's actually, from a bad guy's perspective, it's pretty easy to steal any computer. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I've seen is some organizations that haven't learned that they really need to encrypt their desktop computers as well until one of their desktop computers gets stolen.
Yeah.
So again, this is less of a work from home thing, but there's a good point there in terms of thinking about how security works for that.
Yeah.
So you had asked about BYOD though, and so in this case, we actually have seen some folks who are using bring your own device, have allowing or asking workers to work on their own computers at home, and I would say that I would say that at least for our client base, that's pretty rare. Most organizations are deploying computers that they own and control to
Mm-hmm.
their workforce,
Yeah.
but we've seen a little bit of BYOD, and I think um, and in that case, so broadly, I just say there's a struggle with that, and the struggle that most organizations have is how do they take the security things that they know how to do for their own computers and extend that to computers that they don't own.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think one of the biggest challenges we're seeing is with management teams and leadership teams. We always try to teach organizations how to leverage technology and what's new and things out there. So we'll talk about chat, we'll talk about Teams, video conferencing, and all these different solutions for collaboration, and that can scare somebody because they don't know what that looks like. Well, now they have been thrust into this situation, and they need to evaluate these things. So having these conversations now, it's very important that the leadership push this initiative to talk about technology, talk about mobility and what it means to the organization. You talk about encryption, and someone taking off with a machine. Yeah, that stuff happens. We actually had it to one of our customers 20 years ago, way back when, probably more than that. Someone couldn't connect to their server. I'm like, well, power it down, power it up. Well, where is it? And what do you mean? So that stuff does happen. And there was a window that was open and someone climbed in. So that stuff happens. But I think one of the scariest things is this whole mention of the cloud and where does my data live? And people who don't understand it get very scared, which I understand. Now you have to have the conversation about virtualization, the cloud, and how to protect your company from this sort of situation.
Right. Yeah. Well, so my consulting company, Lopter, is relatively young. We started in 2013, and one of the things I sometimes will tell people is it was lucky for us because by 2013 we could really start our business and do it really completely in the cloud. So my team uses laptops. Obviously, you know, we're working with our clients, but what we don't have is we don't have any servers in the office.
Mhm.
And so for us, you know, in this particular situation, we didn't have to sort out the how do we work differently when we work remotely, because it is the same for us.
Yeah.
And one of my clients actually, for a number of years, the founder of the company talked about a goal that he had, and this is kind of a business continuity goal. His goal was for the office in which they worked to be the shelf for his water cooler. And that was the way that he described his goal for where he wanted to be. You know, the idea was he didn't want to rely on anything that was in the office as being critical to his business operating.
Mhm.
And so we moved from a security perspective, from a technology perspective
Mhm.
in that direction. And it made a big difference. It meant that this organization was really well equipped for the move. Now, they actually did have one item that they had to deal with, and that was a large format printer that they had
Yeah.
that was, you know, used to process. It people and even customers would print things to this printer, and then they would be mailed out. So they had this problem to solve of how to deal with that. Are those kinds of problems things that you see with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. We're it's a smaller challenge than it used to be because logistically we can. Perfect example is someone needed webcams, right? So we're all over the place trying to get webcams for everybody. Over the past couple of weeks, we went to a place to order them. They would only allow 5. So now I had to order some and ship to my house. And we had to play that game. They showed up in 3 days. We used a local delivery service for like $15. We got them. I mean, it was seamless. So now the logistics aspect of it is helping. It's just the protection of that information. You know, if someone is using a home machine in their personal device, that's something you have to pay attention to. If it's a laptop, that's great. You have more control over that. But now you've got kids, you've got other people in the house. You've got the possibility of them taking their laptop out to their garage and leaving it in the garage. So there's just a different array of challenges on the security side. But having the technology of today, like digital faxing, we talked about that in a couple videos. Sending, emailing an email address and having it go out via fax, receiving a fax via email. People still need fax. That's just the way it is. And then doing stuff local in your home office and things like that is a challenge. So we were actually able to pick up our staff at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday and say, okay, everybody's home. And I think that's a good transition into a couple of things that now you have the ability to have morning sunrise meetings with your team, video conferences to make everybody feel connected. This is what the technology can do. It can connect people, be a little more human than a conference call. Right. And now you can quickly, pick somebody up, talk to them in a video, and see how they're doing, see their mannerisms, see how their faces. Are they really happy? Are they really challenged? So I every time I call you or see you, you look great. You look happy. So it's great that we can have this video conference, even though we have seen some challenges with conferencing lately. I'm sure you obviously know about the challenges with video conferencing now. Do you want to take us through, see if anyone can take anything away from your insight?
Yeah. So there's first, one of the challenges that we saw with clients early on, and I'm sure anybody who was doing it was, first of all, there was like a learning gap, right? There was there are a lot of organizations that while they might use video conferencing and web conferencing, they weren't using it a lot. And so what you used to see is, every time somebody would send you an invite, it was for a different service that you'd never used before. And so usually the first 10 minutes of every meeting was people trying to figure out the technology and get everything working, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so as we all moved to video conferencing, then that absolutely happened for everybody. And so you had this kind of struggle. And then
And
we saw,
everyone kind of looked like this. They're like going like this, and they're hitting their like space odyssey here. Like, uh, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
yeah. And so then you kind of move to, okay, now we figured out how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Now it seems like there isn't enough bandwidth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was a combination of probably, the ISPs and the service providers and the organizations figuring out how to work with it. And there was a thing we almost touched on it a little bit ago, but but it's kind of like this as people are getting out here and organizations go out into their offices. I mean, it's going to take a little detour. So one of the challenges you see is people who are not used to working out of the office oftentimes haven't figured out how to work the VPN piece. So the initial thing that you think is, well, I've got to get people into the office so that I have that control. So everybody's going to VPN in, and then we'll control everything from there. And the tough thing about that is if you send everybody home and then you require a VPN connection from everybody for everything that they do, that means when you do a web conference, you're actually forcing all of that traffic to come through the VPN and then out your company's internet connection. And it just creates a bandwidth load that you really just don't want to have. So there's a thing that companies had to do, which was figuring out how and when to use their VPNs. And for a lot of organizations, it varies depending on how much they have that's on premise versus in the cloud. So how flexible they can be to not use a VPN. So, all right, that was a little detour because when we think about web conferencing, then that was a challenge. But once we got through this bandwidth piece, and I think a lot of the organizations I talk to now say that they've gotten through that, so that you don't see lag, you don't have as many connection problems as we used to have. So then you're getting into security, and there's a fair amount of press about some issues, and one of the issues is a question about protection of data, and a lot of that is kind of like, so one of the topics is the data encrypted end to end? And for most products, it really isn't. And the reason that this matters is because you have this idea from a compliance perspective that you need to protect sensitive data during a conversation, right? And so the way most of these web conferencing services are set up is you connect from your computer. And so in our case, we're talking to each other, and we have this connection that happens from our laptop to the server, and from the server to your laptop, and we're talking through this connection, and it's encrypted in my case from my laptop to the server, and then from your case from your laptop to the server. But then it's unencrypted and then re-encrypted, and that happens in most cases so that the service provider can do some extra things, like maybe doing a recording and doing a transcription. So there's some cool things that those service providers can do by being able to handle the connection this way. But the question that comes up is, am I complying, right? Have I broken some rule in HIPAA or PCI or whatever it might be that prevents me from doing this? So there's discussion about that. That's a thing that you kind of have to sort out.
Yeah.
So that's one point. And then there's another set of things that kind of go into how you configure the service. And this is a problem that it's not unique to web conferencing either. It's a thing that happens with any product that you're using, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. And an example of that is Office 365, which a lot of organizations use. With Office 365, Microsoft does a lot of great things to secure Office 365, to secure their data centers, and they provide a lot of tools to customers who use Office 365. But the key thing that we have to remember is they provided tools to make Office 365 secure, but it's up to us, and service providers like you and I, it's up to us to make sure that the Office 365 that we use is secure. And
Yeah,
that's the
that's a great
case.
point. That's a great point.
And when
Yeah.
you think about it from a web conferencing perspective, that's part of this point is when we're using web conferencing, we have to do things as basic as making sure that we update our web conferencing software. So
Mhm.
just like you have to update Microsoft Windows, you have to update your Zoom when you're using it. So that's a thing. There are these configuration settings that you need to set.
Mhm.
One of the things now that we're talking about a lot is just making sure that you have passcodes, passphrases, a pin
Mhm.
on all of your meetings so that
Mhm.
somebody who isn't invited can't show up in one of your meetings.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's there's making sure the host has complete control. These companies are providing you a platform. Okay, it is not their responsibility to do um, to make sure that this meeting is handled properly and the settings are correct. They're providing you a platform. It's your responsibility to know how to configure this platform to make sure it's the best. And it's your responsibility to protect your own information. Yes, they have to encrypt things and do their part, but if you're sharing your screen, it's your responsibility to make sure you're not sharing sensitive data to 50 people and that's blurred out or it's annotated in some way. And then you're only sharing the app window and not your entire screen. So when something pops up, it's not providing information to be. So it's that person's responsibility to take it to that next level. That's a great point. That's a great point.
Right. Yeah. And there's, when we were talking about BYOD earlier, and there's kind of a parallel that you can see in terms of the way that organizations need to think about managing their web conferencing,
Mm.
and then also what they need to think about in BYOD. And this parallel kind of goes like this: is as an organization, what you need to do is you need to think about the platform or platforms that your workforce are using. And the reason I say platforms is because most organizations will adopt one. They'll say, okay,
Mhm.
our official teleconferencing platform is Zoom, for instance. So they'll
Mhm.
pick that. But then I use Uber Conference. And so if it's Uber Conference, then it's like, wait, okay, so if I set the meeting, it's going to
Mhm.
be this platform. And if you set the meeting, it's going to be this. And so I have, I don't know, 4 or 5 different platforms that are installed on my laptop because I've got that many platforms that clients are using. And the
Mhm.
thing that happens then is you have to, as an organization, both be aware of how it's being used, make sure that you've helped provide guidance on each of the platforms. Here's what you're allowed to do, here's what you're not allowed to do. And then as an administrator, make sure that you've configured your part of the web conferencing platform securely,
Yeah,
or you've communicated to your staff what their responsibilities are.
for sure.
And
And
that's the parallel that I see to BYOD, and that is
Mhm.
if you're going to have people working from home, then what you want to do is you want to think about how you can help them to secure their home computers as well.
yeah, and I think now, I mean, things have changed nowadays in the landscape of information. So it's kind of the same thing as when I go into a doctor's office or I go somewhere, they ask me for my credit card or my social security number. I ask, what do you do with this information? It's the same thing when you see somebody replying to all or putting everybody's name in the to field. It's important that everybody shares information nowadays to say, hey, listen, this meeting doesn't have a password. Moving forward, you should do that. Or we're talking about sensitive information. We should probably do this way. It's okay to say that nowadays. People don't get offended because they understand security is it's a big deal.
Right.
So just raise your hand. Say to somebody, hey, we should have a password on this, or hey, next time you do this, let's kind of spread the knowledge here and help one another.
Yeah.
Now, a quick question on the well, there's 2 parts. 2 more things I want to talk about just before the end of this is number one, with all these regulations, the SHIELD Act just went into place that you mentioned we haven't heard much about. I'm still getting emails about it and everything, and we're talking to our customers about that. You have HIPAA regulations, mandates, GDPR, all these things that are happening. Have they been affected or have they changed any of their guidelines and requirements with what's going on? Or is it kind of, hey, you just need to work within the guidelines, and that's all you can do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we've talked about the Shield Act before, and we were talking about it, I guess, a little bit before we started recording. But the main thing with the Shield Act is that we haven't seen anything in terms of changes with the way that it's implemented. The biggest thing that I noticed was this March 21st, March 22nd date that was kind of like okay, now the Shield Act is going into effect. Just there was no publicity about it at all.
Yeah,
There was
nothing.
no mention of it, right?
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of like you're like, hey, you know what? That was a week ago, and we had to do the Shield Act, and it probably in a different world, we would certainly have been hearing more about what was going on with this. I don't think that there's been a change in terms of the regulations or expectations. If you think about the Shield Act and you compare it to New York State's DFS regulations, the biggest difference was that with New York State DFS, there was a requirement to do an attestation, and New York State's Shield Act doesn't have that same requirement. So it's really just an expectation that organizations need to be taking good steps to secure their security programs. And the thing about the Shield Act is anybody who's working in New York State or anywhere in the United States should be paying attention to requirements like this, because what the Shield Act asks us to do are the things that we should do to protect our data, to protect individuals' data, and to keep our systems secure. So there's nothing in the Shield Act that should be onerous for an organization. They're all good things to do.
Yeah.
So, if you think about it that way, yeah, the Shield Act also is the way that you protect your network and your systems and your data, your employees and your customers from hackers. So just, we should continue to do that. Even if
nothing has really changed, right? Nothing is, you still gotta play by the rules.
Yeah, and New York State has other things to worry about right now, but we still do have to protect our data while we're doing all of the other things we have to do. And then you mentioned HIPAA, and HIPAA is probably the one area where we have actually seen regulators giving guidance. And there's a couple things that I've seen in terms of guidance from HHS, and one of them is they loosened restrictions on teleworking. So there was a point where they went, they gave organizations more flexibility in terms of being able to do, it really was telehealth. So it was really in the aspect of, if I'm doing treatment, I'm talking to a patient, I can now do that. For instance, I can do that using FaceTime on my iPhone, as opposed to having to use a specific technology that has been through a more formal vetting as a HIPAA compliant product. And the key there was they just wanted to make sure that when patients needed help, doctors wouldn't be kind of handcuffed because the patient didn't have the technology they needed. They're sitting there with an iPhone and could have been using FaceTime, but the doctor wasn't allowed to do it. So that was a big change and a positive thing to do. And then the second thing that we saw was a kind of a loosening of restrictions in terms of data disclosure that basically allows covered entities, so that would be providers or payers, and business associates that work with them, organizations that might need to share information with, say, a government agency that's trying to get a hold on this epidemic. What the problem was that they were having trouble, the agencies are having trouble getting data because organizations are focused on protecting that data. And so there was a slight lessening of requirements that allows a better sharing of data that has to do with spread of COVID-19, just so that everybody can react better to it.
Right. Absolutely. So I know on our side, we're going to be putting up some information continuously on LinkedIn and on our website and things like that from the technology side, a little bit on the cyber side, because we do have to, educate our teams and our customers and our network. Do you have resources that they can, individuals can reach out to that can collect some information?
We do actually. On Lopter, the consulting company's website, we have a set of resources that's really all related to coronavirus. And so it's kind of, because it's coronavirus, a key focus of that is work from home. And so we've put together a set of guides, both for individuals. So some of the guidance that we provided is really just to help people to understand how to secure their computers and their mobile devices and their workspace and their home network, so that those are more secure as they're working from home. And a thing about that is we really wrote that guidance so that even if you weren't working from home, it would help individuals to just be more secure at home.
Absolutely.
And part of that is for us was thinking about it and saying, well, if you think about it, a business's impact, if you have a worker who has their home network hacked, then even if they're not working from home, it affects you, because it affects, it takes time for this person to recover from it. So there's some pieces in there. There's also guidance for IT folks that kind of talks through what you need to do. And I know you've read this already, but
absolutely, yeah.
kind of goes through and says, here are the things that you need to do as an organization to take care of the technology aspects of it. And there's a set of resources. There's on the software side with Virtual Security Center, our Loki.software website, there we've put together some guidance that's kind of focused more around what Virtual Security Center can do that helps you. And so that just kind of walks through different things that you can do. We have new policies from work for home. We have training and awareness resources and a set of guidance documents. So we've tried to, for our Virtual Security Center customers, just make it easy for them to kind of make that transition. So we've tried to provide as much information as we could just to really help with those issues. And now what we're doing is, as customers ask questions, anything that we answer for them, we're trying to turn around and say, okay, is this something that we could share with a greater population? So we're continuing to add things to our websites as well.
Great, and I appreciate you guys doing that. I think right now it's very important to get as much information out there, just even if it's little to-dos or little tidbits of information. I think it's important that we do that. And just in closing on our side, it's very important that communication is your number one goal. Without communication to your user base, what's expected, clarity on how to do your job remotely, securely, how we expect you to use our information and our data, if that is not clear, there can be issues there. So it's very important that there are either weekly meetings or at the daily meetings, there's clear, concise communication to your user base. Because the users, as you know, are the biggest target.
Yeah.
So Dave, I really appreciate your time. We'll wrap it up here today. Stay safe. And I appreciate everything you're doing for the community to inform them on how to be safer with their information. I'm Eric Poza from Copeland Technology Solutions. And if you have questions on cybersecurity or technology, you can reach out to either Dave or myself, and we'd be glad to help you as best as we can.